All right, so picture this. You're a platoon leader, you're stationed overseas. Everything seems quiet, maybe even routine. And then, bam, something that seems totally insignificant blows up into a huge international incident.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what went down back in '76 with that crazy tree trimming incident in Korea.
Right.
Total escalation.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a stark reminder that even for us, we've been there, done that, infantry platoon leaders, we always got to be on our toes, we've got to be aware of just how fast a crisis can go from 0 to 60.
Yeah, absolutely.
So today, we're diving deep into FM 300, operations during crisis, to break down exactly how these big army ops connect to what we do in the field.
For sure. You're spot on about those quiet situations going south in a heartbeat.
Mm-hmm.
FM 30 actually defines crisis as any situation that pops up out of nowhere, threatens the U.S., our citizens, our military, or anything vital to our interests.
Okay, got it.
These situations, just like when you get that sudden enemy contact, demand that same quick thinking, that adaptability, just on a way larger scale.
Makes sense. So let's talk about the other guys in these situations, the adversaries.
Okay.
How does the Army view their mindset, how they think in these situations? Like, if you were leading that opposing force, how would you use the chaos to your advantage?
That's the million-dollar question right there. See, adversaries, they see crises as golden opportunities, chances to flip the script and tip that balance of power their way.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine this. A rival platoon, they're spreading rumors about your strength, your plans, trying to mess with your guys' heads, undermine morale.
Classic disinformation tactic.
Exactly. Now, scale that up. Adversaries, they might use diplomatic channels, they might flex their economic muscle, all to sway the court of global opinion. It's all about controlling the narrative, making the crisis fit their agenda.
So it's like they're waging psychological warfare, trying to get in your head, just like a rival platoon leader trying to psych you out.
Right. You got it. And just like you'd make a preemptive move to take that crucial terrain, adversaries, they aim for that fait accompli, meaning they've already made that power play, forcing our hand, making us react to them, not the other way around. One classic example. The Soviets rolling into Czechoslovakia back in '68. Boom, rapid deployment, took control of everything important, and bam, fait accompli. The West was left scrambling, trying to figure out a response.
So they're boxing us in before we even know what hit us.
Precisely. And they might even test the waters, see how we react. Think of those probing attacks your platoon might face. The enemy testing your defenses, your reaction time. Now scale that up. We're talking cyber attacks on infrastructure, pushing into disputed areas, even backing proxy forces. They want to see what we'll tolerate.
So just like having good relationships with those units around you is vital for a platoon leader. Those big alliances, they're make or break on the global scale, right?
Absolutely. Adversaries, they're like sharks smelling blood in the water. They look for any cracks in those alliances, any weakness they can exploit. It's like that old saying, divide and conquer. Isolate us, make us look unreliable to our partners, and suddenly that united front crumbles.
Right. Got to maintain those partnerships.
Yeah.
So, okay, we've talked about getting inside the adversary's head, but how does the Army actually flip the script and gain an advantage in these crazy situations? What are our strengths, and how do we use them effectively?
That's where the Army's real strength comes in, knowing how to build advantages and use them. And it's not just about raw firepower, no way. FM 3 breaks it down into 3 areas: physical, informational, and human. We got to hit them on all fronts.
Okay, so it's like a triangle, right? Each side supports the others.
You got it. Now, on the physical side, think about where we put our stuff, our resources. Like, your platoon wouldn't roll into a hot zone without a good cache, right?
Yeah.
Same principle here. The Army, we pre-position supplies and equipment in key spots around the world. It's a show of force, like saying, we're ready, anytime, anywhere.
So it's like having a forward base even before things go sideways.
You got it. Now, let's talk information. We talked about how the adversary uses disinformation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our ability to control the narrative, put out the truth, that's critical.
Yeah.
Just like back when you were leading patrols, remember? Comms discipline was everything.
Absolutely. One slip up and the whole mission could be compromised.
Exactly. It's about controlling the message, but also about disrupting the enemy's ability to command and control. Denying them the ability to communicate effectively can be just as powerful as taking out their command posts.
Like we're jamming their signals on a global scale.
You got it.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about the human element, the human advantage. You know this better than anyone. A good leader knows their people, their strengths, and weaknesses.
Building that trust is essential, knowing how each person will react under pressure.
And on the bigger stage, it's about building those same strong bonds with our allies. understanding different cultures where we operate, even winning over the local population. Sometimes winning hearts and minds is just as important as winning firefights.
Absolutely. So we've talked about the adversary, we've talked about our advantages, but what happens when we actually have to put boots on the ground?
That's when we get into force projection, one of the most complex and challenging parts of military operations.
And from your experience, what are some common misunderstandings about force projection? It can't be as simple as loading up some C-17s and sending them across the world, right?
You'd be amazed how many people think that's all it is. It's a whole lot more than just moving people and equipment from point A to point B. We got to do it smart, do it fast, and make sure our guys have everything they need when they get there, ready to fight.
I can only imagine the logistics involved in moving an entire brigade with all their vehicles and equipment. It's mind-boggling.
Tell me about it. It takes incredible planning, coordination, and the ability to adapt on a dime when things inevitably go wrong. We saw that in Iraq, Operation Iraqi Freedom, when Task Force Iron Horse had to change their deployment plans on the fly because of logistical hurdles. It just goes to show, even with the best plans, you got to be ready to roll with the punches.
And that highlights why those pre-positioned stocks we talked about are so vital.
100%. Having the right stuff in the right place at the right time. But it's not just logistics. It's about intel, understanding the battlefield, anticipating threats, and mitigating risks every step of the way.
So it's a constant process, force projection, not a one-time thing. Constantly evaluating, adapting, and overcoming challenges to make sure our forces arrive ready to complete the mission.
You nailed it. And everyone's got to be working together. Planners back at HQ, logisticians keeping the supply lines open, and the boots on the ground doing the job. And of course, we can't forget about keeping those forces safe while they're on the move.
Because you know the adversary is looking for any chance to disrupt our movement, exploit any weakness they can find.
You know it. Whether it's protecting ships and planes from attack, securing supply routes from sabotage, even fighting off cyber attacks on our communications, we have to be on guard constantly.
It's like that old saying, the enemy gets a vote.
That's right. They're always going to have their say. And that's what makes this relevant to you, even as a platoon leader. The same stuff you deal with, planning, coordinating, communication, adapting it, all scales up to these huge operations.
So even though we're focused on the platoon level, understanding these bigger concepts of force projection helps us see where we fit in.
Exactly. Speaking of fitting in, let's break down the different levels of the Army, the echelons, and how they all work together during a crisis.
So we've covered a ton of ground here, from how the adversary thinks to the whole deal with force projection. But let's zoom out to that big picture view you mentioned. How does the Army actually structure itself to handle these massive crises? What are the different command levels, and how do they all work together?
Think of it like your experience as a platoon leader. It's a layered approach, right? Your platoon's part of a company, which is part of a battalion, and so on, right?
Yeah.
And this structure, it's what lets the Army command and control forces all over the world, all working towards the same goal.
So it's like those Russian nesting dolls, each one fitting inside a bigger one.
Perfect analogy. So at the top, the biggest doll, you have the theater army. They're calling the shots for all military operations in a specific region. It's a huge job. They need to understand the whole geopolitical landscape, what's going on in the region, and the capabilities not just of our forces, but our allies and the potential adversaries too.
So they're playing 3D chess, basically.
Yeah.
Trying to anticipate the opponent's moves while developing those long-term strategies.
Exactly. One level down, you've got the core. They take the theater army's strategic guidance and turn it into actual operational plans. Think of them like the conductor of an orchestra, coordinating the movements and actions of multiple divisions, the different sections of the orchestra.
So the core is responsible for those big synchronized maneuvers and engagements, those large-scale operations.
You got it. Now, moving down to where the rubber meets the road, the tactical level, we have the divisions. They're the heavy hitters, the ones executing the big offensive and defensive operations.
So they're taking those operational plans from the core and turning them into action on the ground.
Precisely. And within the divisions, you've got the brigades, smaller, more self-contained units that bring specialized skills to the fight. Like, remember the 2019 attack on the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad? A brigade was mobilized and deployed super fast to reinforce the embassy and de-escalate the situation.
That's a great example of how, even in today's world, sometimes you just got to have boots on the ground ready to go at a moment's notice.
Absolutely. And now you might be wondering, okay, the crisis is handled, things are calming down, what happens next?
That's exactly what I was thinking. Does everyone just pack up and go home? What does that transition period look like?
It's a great question because How a crisis ends is just as important as how it starts. FM30 talks about two main paths: transitioning back to competition, or, if we have to, transitioning into armed conflict.
So it's not always a clear-cut victory.
Not usually.
Yeah.
Transitioning back to competition doesn't mean the threat is gone. It means we've stopped things from escalating, and we're shifting back to a more strategic posture. Like, think about finishing a patrol. You're not out of the woods yet, right?
Right.
You stay alert, maintain security, and prepare for what might come next.
So it's about holding on to the progress we made, strengthening those alliances, and always being ready if things go south again.
You got it.
Yeah.
But we got to be real, sometimes deterrence doesn't work. And if that happens, the Army's got to be ready to shift gears from responding to a crisis to engaging in armed conflict.
Going from preventing a fight to winning one.
Exactly. And that shift, it means changing our mindset, our strategy, our tactics. We go from holding the line to actively defeating the enemy. And we got to do all that while sticking to the law of armed conflict, to our values as an army.
So whether we're going back to competition or fighting a war, the Army's role after a crisis is complex and constantly changing.
Exactly. And that's why understanding FM30 is so important, even for leaders with your experience. It helps you think about crises not just as isolated incidents, but as part of this bigger picture of competition, conflict, and everything in between.
It's about being adaptable, ready for anything.
Exactly. Now, one last thing for you to think about. We've been talking about the Army, but these days, crises usually involve working with other branches, joint operations. How would you, as a platoon leader, handle a situation where you're getting close air support from the Air Force? What are the challenges and the opportunities of working with other branches in those high-pressure situations? Something to think about. Until next time.
Thanks for listening.